Query and Company.
I'm going to be keeping you company for the next few hours.
You are not going to believe the company.
This company.
You're going to bankrupt your mama's company?
At least I have the radio to keep me company.
On 93.5 and 107.5. The Fan.
So, Eddie, I have a question for you on this Thursday.
I'm doing well. Thank you for asking.
Well, that answers my question. Thank you
How
for
are you
showing-
doing?
I'm well, thank you. Have you ever had occasion, and I'm asking this rhetorically, I guess, for the entire audience. Sometimes it's difficult to have to portray something you're not. It's difficult for any and all of us to have to execute or go about something in a form or fashion that we put forth the best look, but it's not organically who we are. And we've all had occasion in a workplace to do exactly that. And I thought about it last night, and I thought about it today on my way in. And there were a lot of things that I was thinking about on my way in today. For example, I was thinking about some of the comments that were made last night after the game between Connecticut and Butler, and about how it shows the complexities of college basketball in 2026. And Dan Hurley, who is one of the most polarizing coaches in the game, but clearly a brilliant mind of coaching, and some of the comments he made about Butler basketball, which we'll play for everybody coming up in about 30 minutes. And I became aware of those after I got back last night from Muncie and watching Ball State and Buffalo at Worthen Arena. Buffalo getting they got a really good player, at least a guy that plays really well against Ball State and has had some of his better games against them. That was a real handful for Ball State last night. But still fun to go up to. That's a great arena. Worthen Arena really is a great arena. And going up to Ball State just to go up and watch a game. And it was cool to do so. But I got back just in time to see the end of the Butler-Connecticut game and seeing some of the comments that will play for everybody coming up in about 30 minutes. And then I flipped over to watch the end of the Pacers game. And in kind of soaking in everything with that, it took me to this. And I guess I can say this now because it's a sister station of ours, but a former company that we worked for. And it applies to, I think, what's going on right now within the NBA and with the future and, well, the now and the future of the Indiana Pacers. When I was a younger broadcaster, I had worked in television, and I got the opportunity to come over and do the morning show sports. I was a sports guy on the morning show with Jeff Pigeon and Terry Stacy. And Jeff Pigeon, just a super guy and one of the biggest talents to ever come through this state. And it truly was a privilege and an honor and, a blessing to work alongside him and see him every day and how he went about his craft. And the same with Terry, it goes without saying, who still works here within the building. And one day when I was doing my sports report, I made a comment about soccer. And it lit up the phone lines. And people were calling in, and people were upset, and they were outraged over a comment I made about soccer moms or soccer parents or something. I don't remember the exact context of it. It's irrelevant. But the radio station that I was working for at that time, WIBC, and the management at that time wanted to try to make it a younger audience. And they saw me as not the only, but as an avenue to try to get younger people on there and to shake things up a little bit. And so they came to me and asked if they could kind of reinvent the position that I was working. And essentially, and they took me out to lunch, and they said, we want you to be as polarizing as possible. Push the envelope. If you go too far, we'll let you know. But basically, be hot take guy. And of course, I'm a young broadcaster. I'm a little bit intoxicated by the attention of it or the opportunity of it, and I say, okay, because that's what's being asked of me from above. And so that's what and who I was. And I remember one day saying something on the air that maybe I didn't even 100% like feel or believe in, but I did it because it was the character I was being asked to portray. And my mom called me that night and said, "Is that really you on the radio?" And I said, "Mom, you got to understand, this is what, I mean, they're telling me to, this is what they want me to do. I've got to follow like command here." And that did not last long, and eventually they decided that was not the direction they wanted to go, and so I was left on the beach, and they moved on. And I totally get it. And I've always been grateful for that opportunity. The point I'm making is this, twofold. Number one, because I learned from that experience, I think now what you hear on the radio is authentically me. I don't think, I know. What you hear on the radio is authentically me. I don't spout opinions or polarizing takes for the sake of doing so. What I say is what I truly think, and I try to be thoughtful in my approach. But I don't say that as some sort of a disclaimer to let people know what they're getting here, but rather to simply say this. I understand and I respect and I appreciate what it's like in a workplace to have to be someone you're authentically not because that's the role that's being asked of you. And I think all of us in some way, shape, or form have had that happen. And last night as I'm watching the Pacers and I'm seeing Micah Potter and I'm seeing Ethan Thompson and I'm seeing Talon Peter and I'm thinking to myself, guys, do not screw this up. The Pacers have this perfect opportunity to land themselves a top 4 pick in the NBA draft, and we all know the importance of that this year with 4 trajectory-changing players presumably available within that front 4. And what an opportunity that would be. And the Pacers can get younger, and the Pacers can go out, and even though they have this core, and they went to the finals, and they were a half away, they were 2 quarters away from winning an NBA championship, and the comebacks over Cleveland, and the comebacks over New York, and the comebacks over Milwaukee, and the comebacks in the earlier games against Oklahoma City, and the whole city behind it, and yes, sirs, and just this sweeping sentiment, this bond amongst the city about the Indiana Pacers, and they can get right back there again with this roster once they're healthy, and especially when you sprinkle in a young, dynamic scoring wing. So all we ask of you, Indiana Pacers, is that you go out and you make sure that you stay in that bottom 4. That's all we ask of you. And as I'm watching it and I'm saying to myself, what are they doing? And it felt weird. It felt odd. It felt unauthentic to sit there and root against a shot going in. No, don't hit that. It's tied up. What are you doing hitting a 3? Come on. This is a perfect opportunity. You're playing the Nets, one of the teams that you're in contention with for this bottom 4. Do not win this game. That's what you're thinking in the back of your mind. And then you're like, wait a minute, that's not authentically me. Authentically me should want Indiana to win, should want the Pacers to win. And as I'm going through this flux of emotion, and as I'm going through this yin and yang of the way I should feel versus the way I do feel, and the way that I'm supposed to be versus the way that I naturally am. And I'm going back to thinking about those times as a younger broadcaster when I was asked to be something that was different than what I am. And in the end, the natural me won out. Because do I have my moments? Of course. But it's not naturally me to get on the radio and be hot take, shock value guy. That stuff is like a house fire. It starts out and it roars in inferno, and then eventually everybody gets tired and goes home and goes back to their house, and they're like, yeah, I mean, it was fun to watch for a while there. And I get that. But the long-winded point I'm trying to make is this. As I'm watching that game, I realize that you can ask players You can hint to players. You can let the players know what the best interest of the franchise is. But if you are an NBA player, if you are a guy that saw your father, you didn't see it because it was before you were around, but know that your father played in Final Fours at Syracuse, as is the case with Ethan Thompson, and competed in a Power 5 league at Oregon State at the time when it was in the Pac-12. If you're a guy like Micah Potter that played in the Big Ten, that competed at the highest level, if you're Talon Peter, who was a guy at a smaller school that many think was overlooked at times, but used defensive prowess and tenacity and work ethic to scratch and claw his way into opportunity and land by being drafted into the NBA. If you are Quentin Jackson, that played at a Power 5 school, and every time your number's called, you go out there and you get buckets. Your core, your identity, and your true authentic self is to compete. And so it seems unfair to anticipate or expect that these players that the Pacers roll out there when they go 8 deep are going to do anything other than absolutely be authentically who and what they are. And you are not in the NBA unless you are somebody who your entire life has feasted on competition. And that's the hard part, because those guys deserve the opportunity to play hard, and win games as much as anybody else. And it's unfair to expect that they're going to say, this is perfect. I'm getting this opportunity because they want to lose. No. There's no way they would think that. Just as I didn't think this is perfect. I'm getting this opportunity because they want to redirect this radio station and I'm just the transitional guy. You've got to do in the moment what's the best for your authentic self. And for the Pacers last night, what you found out, and then, Eddie, this is what I thought to myself. Is it possible that this roster is good enough that they can't even lose when they need to, right? And that's not to say that, but honestly, the Pacers a year ago, throughout their run through the playoffs, throughout their run to the finals, their bread and butter, their distinguishing factor and their separation point was the fact that they had a second unit and at times the start of what would have been a third unit if you carried that many players, but they had depth on their roster that they wore teams out because there was very little drop-off. And you always had at least one player on the floor that gave you a chance to win the game. And last night, look at Jarris Walker. Jarris Walker, who all we've been saying forever now is, when is the fog going to lift for Jarris Walker? When is Jarris Walker going to be somebody that can consistently give them minutes and play well and win them games? And yet, now that he's getting that opportunity and he's on the floor as the guy that you're looking towards, it's like, get Jarris Walker off the floor. We don't want to win. And you got to wonder, if you're Jarris Walker, you're like, which way do you want it here? But Eddie, last night was a game in Brooklyn against the Nets that we knew that Indiana needed to drop that game. But you got to give them credit because the guys on the floor aren't going to. They're wanting to play. They're wanting to show that they belong in the NBA, and they're wanting to compete.
Yeah, like guys like Micah Potter are out there trying to prove that they still belong in the NBA. He goes out and has 19 points and 12 rebounds and gets to the line 8 times just because of his aggressive nature on the offensive side on the glass. And Talon Peter hit 4 threes last night. He had it going offensively. And Ethan Thompson scores 15 points off the bench, but you get 23 points and 5 rebounds from Jarris Walker last night. So, I mean, even though they can go out there and try to tank as much as they possibly can, at the end of the day, it comes down to missing shots. And last night, they weren't missing shots, and Brooklyn was.
Especially late.
The Nets made 1 3 in the final 18 minutes of the game. 1 3.
Do you know why I thought about this last night. Do you know why the Brooklyn roster, realistically, every single year should be the best shooters in the NBA?
Because they're the Nets?
They're nothing but nets, right?
Yeah.
Isn't that right? Their roster's nothing but nets.
And if I'm a Brooklyn Net fan in attendance in that game last night or watching, I'm buying a Danny Wolf jersey and saying thank you. The dude just kept jacking up shot after shot last night. 4 of 13, 2 of 7 on threes.
It does feel odd to think that Brooklyn was the winner last night because they lost.
Yeah.
But if you look right now, and by the way, good afternoon to you on a Thursday. My name is Jake Query. That is the voice of Eddie Garrison. It is Query and Company here on 93.5 and 107.5. That's 1075, The Fan. And we do have a lot to get to today, including, as I mentioned, news of Butler and Thad Matta and Danny Hurley. That was big last night, and we'll get to that in about 20 minutes from now. We will also talk Mac Engel, my buddy that I grew up with, but now is the writer for the Fort Worth Star-Telegram. Mac has covered Josh Hoover, the new quarterback at Indiana, that will presumably, assuming he stays healthy, assume the reins from Fernando Mendoza. And Mac has covered TCU. For that matter, he was an adjunct professor at TCU as well, I believe. But Mac has covered TCU for the majority of Hoover's career and games and has seen him play a lot and can add some perspective on what Indiana's getting. That's coming up at 1 o'clock. Our buddy from the Bloomington Herald-Times, Mike
Nizilik.
Thank you, Eddie. Mike Nizilik going to join us coming up at 2 o'clock today to talk about the Combine and the players not named Mendoza for Indiana that are going to be auditioning, if you will, for the NFL. And then there's also IndyCar news to get to. If you are unfamiliar with this announcement coming earlier today, and this was not a guarantee. IndyCar, for those that are unfamiliar, has for a number of years, there have always been different engine manufacturers within IndyCar. And, in the old days, I'm using air quotes, but when Tony Holman bought the track, essentially the rules of the Indianapolis 500 were simple. It doesn't matter what you run. There are minor specifications that you've got to follow just in terms of the height of the car and things like that. But if you are one of the 33 fastest, then there is a qualifying format, and you're one of the 33 fastest, you're in. And the innovation of that intoxicated people and drew them in and lured them in and made people huge fans. And we'll get more into this later in the show. But, of course, when you talk about the Indy 500 of its glory years and its peak cultural significance nationwide, it was a time when it was the showcase, the ultimate showcase worldwide of the innovation of the automobile engine and the boundaries and the limits being tested on how fast a car could go. And so people would sit in the lab all year long awaiting May in Indianapolis, Indiana, where they could roll their car out and show that they came up with an engine that was bigger, badder, faster than anybody else in the world. And that process is what made the Indianapolis 500 the event that it is now renowned of being. But a number of factors went into getting away from that, notably cost, notably lack of innovation of the combustible, gasoline-fueled engine, a number of things over the course of time, and the speed, the limit of what you could test the boundary as well. So there has always been a challenge now of getting, if you don't have that innovation, then what you still want is creating engine competition. And for a while there was, Toyota was the lone supplier for a short window of time. And then Honda got involved, and Chevrolet's always been, around the Indianapolis Motor Speedway and et cetera. But either way, there was a lot of, as the last number of years, there have been two engine manufacturers, Chevrolet and Honda, within the IndyCar series. And there was a lot of concern in the last couple of years, and I can tell you, very deep concern about the possibility of Honda leaving the series as an engine manufacturer. And the announcement today that both Chevrolet and Honda have agreed to multi-year extensions as engine manufacturers. So you do continue to have now the competition. Will they get another or a third engine manufacturer involved? Perhaps. But you still have now the spirit of the competition with the IndyCar, and that is a big announcement here, as at the end of the month, we will be in St. Pete to kick off the 2026 season. But beginning in 27 and moving forward, Chevrolet and Honda will both be a part of it all. But back to the Pacers themselves. Speaking of competition, the competition for the top 4 draft picks. Eddie, we sat down, the two of us, earlier, just before we went on the air, and mentioned the teams that are basically in the race for the bottom.
Yep.
In no particular order.
Race for the bottom quartile.
You have the Sacramento Kings, the Indiana Pacers, the Brooklyn Nets, the Utah Jazz, the Washington Wizards, and then maybe kind of peeking in the Dallas Mavericks, right?
Yeah.
Dallas is probably, one would assume, the furthest out from this. We can get into this with Mac in a little bit as well when he joins us, because he covers the Mavs as well. But of those other teams, I looked up some things earlier.
Oh, that's dangerous.
The Nets have remaining, if you look at strength of schedule by NBA standard, and by that, the record of remaining teams on the schedule and et cetera.
Mm-hmm.
The Nets right now have the 6th hardest remaining schedule. Okay? So you would think real advantage Nets, because they're going to, there are certain teams that you look at it and you know that they have to be saying to themselves, well, we don't even need to try to lose this game, right?
Right.
And Brooklyn has a lot of those remaining on their schedule. The Wizards have the 11th hardest remaining schedule of the 30 teams in the NBA. So the Wizards have the 13th. So in other words, they have the 9th. If you were ranking 1 through 30, the Wizards are 19th in terms of easiest remaining schedule.
And most importantly, Jake, they've got 2 games against the Pacers coming up again out of the All-Star break.
Yeah. So that'll be big, right?
And they just ruled out Alex Sarr with hamstring soreness. With a hamstring strain for 2 weeks.
You're going to see a lot of like soft tissue injuries here coming up, right?
A lot of tissue issues.
That's right. The Sacramento Kings have the 29th hardest remaining schedule. So they have the second easiest, right?
Yeah.
The Pacers right now, 20th hardest. So if you were to rank easiest schedules, the Pacers are 10th. So it's going to be a challenge for Indiana to find the games where they're going to go out and play in those and rest a lot of people and whatever else to try. It is totally unfair. It is unprofessional, and it is beyond the bounds of even responsibility to expect a request that an NBA team is going to overtly come out and say, we're trying to lose games, because it's not authentically who they are. For the roster themselves, for the players themselves, for the coaches themselves, for the trainers themselves, it is not authentically who they are to do anything other than to continue to put their best foot forward.
I think Utah would like to have a word.
Utah also, I forgot Utah. Utah's remaining schedule in terms of the overall strength. 23rd.
Did you see what happened yesterday?
23rd easiest schedule.
With Utah, I don't know if it was yesterday or 2 days ago. I can't remember. They, obviously, Jake, for those that don't know, they have been playing some of their starters, the 2 big ones being Jaren Jackson Jr. and Lauri Markkanen. They've been playing them through 3 quarters, and then they sit him in the 4th. Will Hardy was asked in one of their recent games, he goes, hey, did you consider bringing Markkanen or Jaren back? He goes, nope, no consideration.
Right.
And then Markkanen, I believe this was, yesterday going into their game against Sacramento. He was originally listed as out due to rest, and then there was a change. He became available. So, like, did the league office call him up and be like, hey, you're resting this guy in the 4th quarter. What's he need rest for? He's not playing a full minute, the minutes load that he normally faces. But the news that for Utah today is that they are shutting down Jaren Jackson Jr. for the rest of the season because he needs to have a knee procedure, as they put it, for the long term to better his health, apparently.
Well, and you wonder, will it be determined that, Ivica Zubats is going to need time for his ankle? I'm using air quotes a little bit. But the point simply being that when I go to NBA games, one of the things that jumps out at me, look in Indianapolis. In the city of Indianapolis, we have before ourselves the evidence of what I'm about to mention. You talk to people in Indy to this day, and what do they talk about? Seeing George McGinnis dominate at Washington along with Downing in 69. People still to this day talk about James Blackman and Steve Alford going for, 50 each in an epic matchup in 83. People talk about seeing Scott Skiles and the weird hook of his shot in the 82 state finals. People still talk about Stacey Turan's shot, about how unbelievably dominant Glenn Robinson was. What an unbelievable matchup between Robinson and Henderson in the 91 Final Four. Goes without saying Damon Bailey, or the athleticism on display from Greg Graham, or the scoring prowess and the body control of Eric Gordon. The Conley-Oden undefeated seasons at Lawrence North. There are a million stories. The incredible shooting eye of Rick Mount. And all of those guys are incredible players with incredible legacies. But we're still talking to this day, nearly 40-some years, 44 years after Scott Skiles played at Plymouth, as to what kind of player he was. And he was a nice NBA player. A nice NBA player. Never an all-star, never a starting in the finals kind of guy. So every time I go to an NBA game, I look out over the floor and I see guys on the floor and I think to myself, 98% of the players that I'm seeing right now, wherever they came from, they are the greatest player in the history of their high school. They are the greatest player in the history of their town, or one of the legendary moments. And a guy like Ethan Thompson, there are two guys right now sitting in a BW3 in, Southern California or wherever it was that Ethan Thompson grew up, that are talking about the time that he dropped 41 on him when he was a sophomore. And guys like that, my point being, if you are in the NBA, it's because it was embedded and inbred in you from a very young age to compete and put it all on the line with every single game that you played. And you're not at that point unless that was wired into you from day one. And so therefore, every one of those guys that you're watching had moments throughout their entire upbringing, just like Greg Graham and just like Alan Henderson and just like Scott Skiles and just like Mike Conley and just like Greg Oden and just like Rodney Carney, and guys that we still talk about to this day. And they're still talked about in their hometowns because they have competed from the time they stepped on a floor. And so therefore, no matter how little they might play in the NBA, it is really hard to ask them to not do the same with every game they go out, because that's not authentically who they are. And that's going to be the fascinating dichotomy to watch unfold before us over the course of the next couple of months. But speaking of competing, Butler did that last night against one of the best teams and currently the best programs in college basketball. And that program is coached by a guy that was acting, as he typically does, somewhat maniacal during the course of the game. And then afterwards, I thought to myself, I wonder what this guy's going to say. And what he said, I thought, was incredibly telling about not only Butler basketball, but Division I basketball itself. And we'll replay and dissect what was said next.
Company on 93.5 and 107.5 The Fan.
Here's an unpopular opinion that I've been criticized for my entire life, at least since this song came out. I know that this song is apparently listed by numerous surveys or whatever they do as the number one song of the 80s. And I have nothing against Bon Jovi. But I've always actually thought, and I'm the only person alive that thinks this, I've always thought that You Give Love a Bad Name is the signature song of Bon Jovi and not Living on a Prayer. And people are like, that's the dumbest thing ever because it's the number one song of the 80s. I've never been a huge fan of Living on a Prayer, but You Give Love a Bad Name, from my recollection, was their breakthrough song that put them on the map, and I think the one that most identifies with their typical sound. But I'm alone on this island, I realize. I'm watching last night, and again, good time in Muncie at Worthen Arena. That's a fabulous arena to watch a basketball game. I'm very curious to see what happens with Ball State basketball. I like Michael Lewis a great deal. Don't know him overly well, but we've obviously had him on the radio several times. Know a ton of people that know him well, and I think he's an extremely likable dude. But I do wonder and worry about what happens from the basketball standpoint for Ball State and their future. Just in terms of whether or not they make a coaching change. Because notably and most importantly, going there last night, I'm looking at it and I'm looking around and there was no juice in the building. It's a great arena. And it's not that they don't play well. I mean, I didn't sit there watching them thinking, man, this team is not well coached. But that's a decent league in the MAC, and Ball State has really struggled, and it's kind of ticked downward the last couple of years. But I also, as I'm watching that game and then driving back home, and I then turn on the Butler, Connecticut game. And, Mullins is really good for Connecticut, and they are a machine. And Butler's hanging around, and they're hanging in there. But, just depth and all of the things that go into why a Connecticut beats you, are visible and noticeable there. And as I was watching that game, I really did think about, as I'm watching Mullins play, and it entered my mind. It's funny because it entered my mind as I was watching it. Here's a kid from Greenfield Central, and I got to give him a ton of credit. When it came down to it, and it really was between Indiana and Connecticut, and he opts for Connecticut, and there was a lot of blowback for that. And I thought to myself, I wonder if Butler was ever in play for him. I know I realize Hinkle Fieldhouse, its significance historically is high school attached, but it's still a pretty cool place. Campus is cool. It's in a neat part of town. But sometimes it's best for guys to go away. I was the other day on a rainy day, I was flipping through the channels, and there was a documentary on about North Carolina's 1993 college basketball season. And it's got all the guys sitting around. Donald Williams and, Hubert Davis and all these guys are sitting around telling old stories about being on that 90, George Lynch. And, of course, the late Eric Montross, who they were speaking of in the posthumous sense, and they ran old clips of Montross. And it got me thinking about when Eric Montross was in high school, and there were a ton of factors that went into why he did not go to Indiana, a big part of it being his father's relationship with Bob Knight going back to, as I understand it, the times of the Landon Turner versus Ford lawsuit that took place in 1981, and Scott Montross's involvement in that. Those things have always been out there. But Eric Montross and his decision to go to North Carolina was so, at the time, vilified. And I'm watching this documentary, and I'm seeing like this love and this fraternal feeling and this bond and this connection amongst a team that won a national championship at North Carolina, and thinking about how Eric Montross stayed in Carolina forever, as to after his playing career, and did Carolina radio and everything else. And I'm thinking to myself, he made the right decision. He made a decision for himself that positively impacted him for the rest of his life. And that is a huge part of making a decision in college basketball. And Braylon Mullins did that for Connecticut, and one would assume it will positively influence him moving forward. Now, is Connecticut going to win a national title? Is he going to be there 4 years? No, he's probably going to be there another 4 months. But nonetheless, in watching it all, I was thinking to myself, a huge factor in Mullins' decision to go to Connecticut are 3 letters. NIL. And that's where we are. NIL. And as I'm watching Butler, and I have long felt that Butler, I thought, should have stayed in the Atlantic 10. I totally understand why they went to the Big East, because the almighty dollar drives it all. And Butler, in terms of the Big Ten contracts and Big East contracts and television contracts, the money that Butler was going to make by going to the Big East, they had to do it. I totally get it. But they are swimming in a pool of a bunch of loan sharks. And the NIL, when you look at the money that is going into, and keep in mind some of the schools what does Connecticut have that Butler doesn't? It has football at a high level. I'm not saying a highly competitive level, but a high level nonetheless that brings in additional revenue. And Connecticut, the women's program is obviously huge, but the University of Connecticut, that's the pro brand, if you will, within that state. And as I'm watching it and thinking about all of that and wondering if, in fact, there is like this level playing field or totally unleveled playing field, the game ends and Danny Hurley, who acts 100 miles a minute during the course of the game, then very calmly and very succinctly says something on TNT after the broadcast, after the game ended and on the television broadcast within the window, that jumped out at me. Here you go.
I love Thad. I got so much respect for Thad. He's one of the best college coaches, that in my generation, the work he did here the first time, what he did at Ohio State. When it was college basketball, he was one of the best at it, recruiting, developing. I got so much respect for that guy. This new era, obviously, I'm not sure he's got the resources to be where a coach of his caliber should be.
When it was college basketball, this new era, resources, a lot to unpack there, which we'll do next.
Query and Company on 93.5 and 107.5 The Fan.
So now you're going to play every song but You Give Love a Bad Name?
No, this is the song that got him on the map.
Yeah, that's probably right.
Bon Jovi on the map, yeah.
That's probably right. What did this chart, where did this peak on the Billboard chart?
I would have to look at where Runaway peaked at.
I'm going to guess that peaked at number 11. But I'll look it up for you. I thought about Danny Hurley's and I thought it was really telling. Very telling. Peaked at number 12? What was the date when it peaked?
Hold on. Actually, that was a different Runaway song.
Did you go with Slade, Runaway? Is that what you went with there?
No. Apparently, Kanye West had a song called Runaway.
Okay. But Danny Hurley to say that was college basketball, or back when it was still college basketball. This is a guy that won and is probably right now the best coach in the country, and a coach that turned down the Los Angeles Lakers. But he just said the quiet part out loud. He did. Even though now it's kind of out loud, but he yelled the quiet part out loud. And what I think is really interesting, and he later went on to talk about, like when he says right there, Thad doesn't have the resources. Now, the resources, sure, you can say that means he doesn't have a state-of-the-art practice facility. He doesn't have, all of, the bells and whistles. But what he mostly means by that is he doesn't have the NIL resources to pay for the top players like other teams do. And that's the era now. College basketball now, we know factually that college basketball now is an arms race. And Danny Hurley just admitted that Butler doesn't have the arms in the arms race.
I love Thad. I got so much respect for Thad. He's one of the best college coaches, that in my generation, the work he did here the first time, what he did at Ohio State. When it was college basketball, he was one of the best at it, recruiting, developing. I got so much respect for that guy. This new era, obviously, I'm not sure he's got the resources to be where a coach of his caliber should be.
There you go. Not sure he's got the resources, right? By the way, 39 Runaway.
Yes.
Peak. The resources meaning the money. Now that we know that, and it's out there, and we know that this is what it is, and there's no turning back. The days of, this is going to get a player, money to advertise the local pizzeria and take his girlfriend to the movies on the weekends. That was the original selling point of NIL. Come on. I mean, we're not stupid here, right? The reality is this. NIL, to an extent, has always kind of existed. And I know that we in Indiana like to stand atop the mountaintops, and we don't have mountaintops, but we have snow mountains now in the side of parking lots where it's all been shoveled. We like to stand on top of those and scream out about like the scrupulous Bob Knight and the era when every kid went to class and there were no handouts.
By the way, rain on Sunday now, not snow.
Okay, see, that could help you out in our game here on shrinking the mountains. If you look at Indiana, the Indiana Media Guide used to have a fun thing in the back that said, like, basically, hey, where are they now? And as a kid, I would always flip through it, and I was always fascinated by it. And I'm like, man, it was amazing the number of Indiana basketball players of yesteryear that were working for, and I didn't know what it was when I was a kid, works for the Cook Corporation or Yellow Freight out of Chicago. What that means is, obviously Bill Cook, and corporations that Bob Knight had, access or connection to. And so you knew, and it wasn't below board per se, but if you played at Indiana when you graduated, you were going to get a job for a corporation if you didn't continue to play professionally that set you up for the rest of your life. Scott May still lives in Bloomington because he has built a very successful business off owning apartments that was facilitated by the Cook Corporation once he was done playing. So there was an element of like NIL stuff, but it all happened, of course, after the fact. But you knew it. There was that safety net. And that wasn't unique to Indiana. I mean, it was all over the place. Now it is more right there before your eyes. And the question becomes, if you are a program that still is living in the world when it was college basketball, to use Danny Hurley's comment there, back when it was college basketball. Well, what's the program that is still running things as if it's college basketball? I would say Purdue. Look at Purdue's roster. They are still getting regionally based kids, and I say kids, young men that are from within the state and fit the mold of what it is that they want to do. Purdue's not tailoring its style of play around the caliber of the recruits it just landed. It's rather tailoring its recruiting around the style of play it chooses. And as the waters get choppier and choppier, and everybody's jumping onto a wave runner, there's still room for one or two really strong-based canoes that can manage to get through the waves the old-fashioned way. But there are only a few of them. And it really becomes a matter of who is going to be able to weather the storm and ride through the rough waves until everything kind of settles itself out, and then you emerge as, okay, if you are a top-flight player that wants to go to a program where you're going to stay for 3 or 4 years, where you're going to be able to compete, where you're going to learn the game, etc., and yes, you're going to get some NIL money, but that's not the priority. And I'm not saying there's not priority of NIL at Purdue. Braden Smith's making plenty of money, plenty of it. Don't get me wrong. But I don't know that initially when he got to Purdue, that was the idea. It was, I'm going to go there because this is a place that gives me a chance to compete. And Matt Painter has been able to brilliantly navigate through without falling overtly to the loud part that's being screamed here by Danny Hurley. And there are going to be a handful of programs that can probably sustain that, but more and more of them are going to basically fall the way of, look, we just got to basically get as much money as we can, figure out where we can get it, and go with it. Because you're seeing in this state 2 programs, one in Purdue and one in Butler, that have tried to kind of stay to the way that college basketball used to be, one of which has been able to weather that storm, and the other of which is falling behind because of it. And I wonder how long Matt Painter's, the scruples and the method in which he is able to put together his program and doing it his way, I hope that he is one of those that's going to be able to last and withstand it. And there are going to be 4 or 5 that do. I don't know which ones they're going to be. But it does feel like Butler is already enough behind the 8 ball that they're going to have to play catch-up. And the way to play catch-up now is to get involved in the way it is now, as opposed to standing firm in the way it used to be. Because there's the ground underneath them is more shaky, and that ground of the way it used to be at Purdue is more solid. But more into what Danny Hurley said later after those comments that he said in the press conference about Thad Matta and Butler. We'll get into that in a little bit. When we come back, Indiana's got a new quarterback coming in next year. We know now that the guy that just won the Heisman for them is going to be the first pick, presumably, in the NFL draft. But somebody's going to have to take those snaps for them now. A guy that watched virtually every snap that Josh Hoover took at TCU is Mac Engel. He'll let us know what's coming to Bloomington. We'll talk about that next.
Query and Company on 93.5 and 107.5 The Fan.
Yes. Eddie, are you doing this all day?
Doing what? What are you talking about?
Are we just doing? Is it just a Bon Jovi day?
I guess so.
Okay.
And I'm not complaining about it.
I've always heard he's a good dude, John Bon Jovi. Supposedly one of the nicest dudes, nicest guys. He was in an IndyCar race a couple years ago. He and Brett Michaels were both there.
Really?
And I was wondering if it was going to be some sort of an Aquanet like competition. You know what I mean? Although I think both of them not using as much Aquanet as they used to, but that's not to say their fans didn't. Joining us now, and I'm sure thrilled to be doing so based on that segue, on the Java House Peel and Pour guest line, he is with the Fort Worth Star-Telegram and has covered TCU football, which is the reason I wanted to have him on, and then also to ask him his favorite Bon Jovi song. Mac Engel, friend of the show, joins us now. Mac, your favorite song from Bon Jovi was what?
Oh, man, I feel terrible, Jake. And I mean that sincerely. I never listened to Bon Jovi. But this is the true story. That's true. I didn't grow up listening to Bon Jovi. So I know Wanted Dead or Alive because of the guitar intro. And I do have the unique distinction of having flown on Bon Jovi's plane. That is a true story.
No, hold on.
That's a true story.
How did you end up flying on Bon? Now, was Bon Jovi on the plane as well, or you were like in some airport and they're like, oh, this is the only plane we have available?
No. So I never knew this. So a number of years ago, I've been in Fort Worth for a long time now, 30 years, and I have I've been doing this forever, Jake. So one year, TCU called me and said, hey, would you mind filling in as a color analyst on one of our men's basketball broadcasts at BYU in Provo? I said, yeah, sure. They said, okay, meet us at the airport. It's a private airport. I get to the private airport in Fort Worth, and it's a very, very nice private plane. I mean, nice. And I haven't even walked on it yet. I'm like, wow, this is one hell of a plane. And this is for a basketball team. This would have been they weren't even in the Big 12 yet, to tell you how much money was floating around. So I get on with the team and the coaching staff, and I look at this plane, and it looks like the inside of a hotel room or a suite. I'm like, holy God, I'd never seen a plane like that. And I've flown plenty of times. I've flown private before. I'd never been on a plane like this, Jake, but it looked like a suite. So finally, there was a flight. There had to be a flight attendant. And you got a college basketball team full of all these 6'8", 6'6", 6'10" guys just spread all over the place in these really nice big recliner seats that are spread all over the place like a living room. And I asked the flight attendant, I said, ma'am, whose plane is this? And she said, this is Bon Jovi's plane. And I said, you're kidding. She said, no, this is Bon Jovi's plane. Well, what they do is these entertainers and sometimes really, really wealthy people who have their own planes, to offset the costs, they will lease out their planes when they're not using it. And it just so happened that we used Bon Jovi's plane to get to Provo, Utah, back and forth. So while I have no real fandom of Bon Jovi, I can say this without any hesitation. I sure did like his plane.
This reminds me of the time in high school when I needed to use a car and you leased out to me your 83 Renault Alliance for an hour. You remember that?
The little red engine that couldn't. That's right.
You had
it's virtually the same.
You had on the dashboard. You taped on the dashboard the cover of Car and Driver magazine listing it as Car of the Year, right?
It was. I wasn't wrong. It was Car of the Year. It was one of the best cars ever made. Maybe the finest car ever made. It took me 0 to 60 in a day and a half, brother. And I'm convinced if I had gotten into a wreck, if I had hit a tree, forget a tree, if I had hit anything at greater than 10 miles an hour, I would have been dead on the spot.
Mac, do you remember, and I want to get into Josh over here, but do you remember, I probably mention this every other time you're on, but when you and I were freshmen together at the University of Kansas and the Final Four was in Minneapolis and we were both hell-bent on going, and so the only car we could find was some guy on my dorm floor had a pickup truck that the power steering had gone out on it, and it was like, do you remember this? And we were basically...
I remember... because you remember once you got to like 65 or 70, it would shake like it was going to explode.
I mean, we put our life in our own hands, man.
Oh my God. And that was such a great drive because it was so cold. It was so much fun. But I do remember, like, I've driven certain like rental cars, like rental trucks that have governors on it, so you can't go faster than 70 miles an hour. That truck didn't have a governor on it. It was its own governor. And I remember at times you would try to get the car to go fast, and it wouldn't. It just wouldn't go fast without us thinking, okay, we're going to die because this thing is going to explode.
We drove from Lawrence to Minneapolis in 3.5 weeks over that drive, right?
Yeah, that's right. We went and saw. You went to the Final Four and saw that was Bob Knight's last time in the Final Four, and
Correct.
They lost to Duke, and that was the game I think where Todd Leary came off the bench and hit 3 threes in the last minute, and
Correct.
Todd Nover hit a game.
Matt
Nover hit a 3 to make it a game, and they damn near won.
I know. And Jamal Meeks hit a half-court shot after they called a foul, and they overruled it. And I was watching the game from my seat, which was actually closer to Fargo than the floor, but that's okay. Okay, Mac, what kind of player is Indiana getting in Josh Hoover? You have covered TCU football. You have seen him. He is the transfer quarterback that now is going to take over for Fernando Mendoza. Give me the scouting report.
Oh, boy. This is tough. He is a very good passer. He's got good touch. He's a good thrower. I've seen him play probably half of his games, and he can really throw the ball. He really can throw the ball. He can buy.
Now, when you say that, do you mean that he can throw it like, in the 45-yard, bomb right where it needs to be? Or do you mean he is like a precision thrower that can, like Mendoza was kind of, that can get in rhythm with the intermediate throws and put the ball right in the window where it needs to be? Or both?
He can put it on you. He can put it on you. And he can throw to a receiver on the run, so it's in a good place for him to catch it and move, so he doesn't have to stop or come back. So he's accurate. He's an accurate thrower. He really is an accurate thrower. And he's not a guy who's going to make plays with his feet in terms of, don't expect him, if the play breaks down, like a lot of these quarterbacks can do now, do not expect him to go rip off a 14-yard run or to escape the pocket from 3 guys who are, breathing down his neck, and he's going to rip one off for 7 or 8 yards or for 40. That's not him. Now, he can slide around and move around and get his body square to make a good throw. He can do that. In terms of, he's a good guy, he's responsible, he's not going to embarrass his team, his coaching staff, or Indiana University in any way, shape, or form. He's played a ton of games against good, solid competition. He's done well. He's won a lot of games. I think he's got like 17 or 18 wins in his 2+ seasons as the starter at TCU. And he is, when I talked to 2 NFL scouts about him, they thought, I got 2 different opinions. One was late day 2, day 3 pick. The other one was undrafted would sign with a team where he wanted to go. So that's kind of a wide range there in terms of his draft status. He's already graduated from TCU. He graduated in like 3 or 3.5 years. He's a really good guy. He's really well spoken, and he is a solid quarterback. He is. He is not Fernando Mendoza.
So he is not a design run guy, right?
No way. And I don't know how Indiana's offensive line is going to look next season. Josh is a quarterback who needs his offensive line to help him. He just is. That's not a slight, but I do think it's really important when you bring a guy in, you say, what can this guy do and do well, and how can we put him in a position to do those things? And he's going to need a little bit of help from his offensive linemen. Certain quarterbacks, they don't need as much because they can do things moving forward with their feet. That's not his strength.
If you look at TCU football, which you have and I have not, right?
Mm-hmm.
But, obviously good program, one that has played for a national championship within the last, whatever it was, handful of years. But when you talk about the offensive line for Indiana, if he comes into a situation where there is an acclimation period, or even for that matter, and I don't anticipate this with Curt Cignetti, don't get me wrong, but if there is any sort of adversity that comes the way of Josh Hoover once he's in Indiana, has he overcome adversity from a team standpoint or a scheduling standpoint at TCU? And if so, what was kind of his moxie or his emotion in handling it?
Well, that's a really good question. Because I think you bring up a great point in terms of player development, even just person development. Like, what have you fallen down and did you get up? I think if you look at Josh's career at TCU, now he was a very good high school player. He was a terrific pitcher. He almost played baseball. He's a really, really talented pitcher, but he elected to play college football, and it's obviously worked out well for him. And when he got the starting job, he got it because the guy ahead of him got hurt in a game at Iowa State in the middle of the 23 season. And he came in and he immediately showed something. Now, he had an injury late in the season, so that kind of got sidetracked. Then the next year, TCU started out pretty solid. Then they lost some games where he wasn't very good. They came back to win a handful of games and close out and have a nice finish to the 24 season. They won a bowl game against a really bad opponent, Louisiana Monroe or something, Louisiana University. It was in the New Mexico Bowl. Nobody, it was nothing. But he played well, and they won, and they finished 9-4. And then this last season, they kind of did the same thing, where they started out really well. He had a great game on national TV against North Carolina. That was Bill Belichick's first game at Chapel Hill. Josh looked great. They were playing pretty well. And then they just had another one of those ugly skids where he didn't play really well, the team didn't play well, but they rebounded, and they did finish really strong. And then obviously there was considerable back channel conversations about whether or not he was going to stay for an additional season, and they were trying to work out the contract, and he was still practicing with the team, and then he just left. And that created a lot of hurt feelings between a lot of powers that be and Hoover's side, so to speak, about the money taken and whether or not he fulfilled. That's the NIL world. But can you say that he really fell down? A little bit. I think a little bit, yeah. Can you say he rebounded strong and did all this other stuff? I don't think he could. I think he would say that's pretty good, not bad. I don't think Jake, you would sit there and look at his resume and say, well, that's bad, that's overrated. No, you would say that's pretty good, that's pretty solid. He's a nice passer. He's got some good statistics. They've had some decent wins. He only beat one ranked team in 2+ seasons. They beat Houston on the road a couple months ago, and Houston, I think, was 25th or 22nd, and he threw 3 interceptions in that game. They won in spite of him. And that would happen with him sometimes. He would kind of force it because he was trying to do too much. So I would say, to your question about whether he fell down and came back and all that stuff, I think the biggest thing with Josh, that if I had a criticism, is that he was getting better, and then he didn't get that much better. In fact, I'd probably say he regressed. Now, there's all kinds of thoughts. Was it the offensive coordinator? Was it this? I don't know. But I know this. In some ways, he couldn't be going to a better situation. And in other ways, you would say, dude, that is the hardest situation in college football to walk into.
What would you guess?
Following Fernando Mendoza.
What would you guess that, or have you heard? I don't even know. Based on what he might have been getting NIL-wise at TCU, it's kind of irrelevant at this point. But out of curiosity, what would you guess Indiana it cost them to get him in NIL?
I heard 2 different figures. I heard $4 million, which I had heard TCU was ready to match, and they had an agreement in place to do it. And then I heard he got the same thing as Cincinnati quarterback Brendan Sorsby when he signed with Texas Tech, which is closer to or is $5 million. So it's one of those figures, or it's slightly in between. There was a big deal last year around this time that Tennessee came after him, Josh Hoover. And he said, thanks, but no thanks. I'm loyal to this team, and I want to see this through and win a Big 12 championship here. And everybody made a big deal out of it, that a TCU kid turned down Tennessee. And he got more money. He had more to potentially go, like $2.5 million, I think. That was the reported figure, which I don't know if those are true or not. But in this one, and he already graduated, and I think he just felt the time was right. And obviously the money was great. But those are the figures that I heard. It was anywhere between $4 and $5 million. And given the way the money is floating around some of these bigger programs, especially for quarterbacks, I would lean in the direction that it was closer to 5 rather than 4.
Matt Engel's my guest. He's on the Java House Peel and Pour guest line. He is with the Fort Worth Star-Telegram talking about Josh Hoover. All right. You mentioned TCU and you showed me the campus when I was down there once. I mean, it's state of the art, right? Have you watched Landman, just out of curiosity?
Oh God, yeah.
Okay.
I mean, I don't have a lot of choice. So where I live.
Right.
Yeah.
So that's my question. So for those that have watched Landman, and in Landman, his daughter is taking cheerleading camp at TCU. How true, though, in knowing Landman, and for those that are unfamiliar, Billy Bob Thornton, and he is overseeing and surveying oil fields in West Texas, and then his daughter goes to TCU, and just all that goes into that. How accurate is Landman to life in Texas?
So it's not. I love the fact that they're doing it. It's meant so much to this community that the guy who's doing it, Taylor Sheridan, has dedicated so much of the production to this city and this community. You and I, Jake, know that when Hollywood visits your home state, whether it's Indiana or Fort Worth, Texas, or certain places that are outside the norm of the Hollywood shooting locations now, which have become popular, like Atlanta has become really popular. It's a big, big deal to have Hollywood in your backyard. So when they started to develop Landman, I know a lot of those people who've had cameos, and there's one of the actors lives down the street from me who's worked with Taylor. It's a big, big deal. But is it accurate? I've talked to oil. I've talked to guys who have Billy Bob's job in real life, and no, it's not accurate at all. It's fun, but no. And then one of my favorite things is they make it sound like Midland, Odessa, which is a big area, a big oil and gas area in West Texas. They make it sound like it's about 5 minutes west of Fort Worth. Well, it's closer to 5 hours. But no, it's not accurate.
That's where they fly on Bon Jovi's plane everywhere, Mac. You know that,
right? But it's a really fun show. I'm surprised I don't know if you're watching it or not.
Oh yeah, it's great.
But the one thing that this city's had to do in order to get that business, and I know TCU's had to do it as well, which is basically say, Taylor, we trust you, and we're going to let you do whatever the hell you want. So they're shooting all these TV shows all over. Like I saw Michelle Pfeiffer and one of the actresses. She was like 5 minutes away from my house shooting some scene at some big rich house or wherever, an oil and gas guy. So I've seen all this stuff all over the place, and you see how like Sam Elliott's been in town, John Hamm's been in town. They go into these restaurants. It's really been a lot of fun. But in terms of its accuracy, I would say it is exaggerated fun, but I would still recommend it.
It is great, by the way. By the way, is Mark Cuban buying the Mavericks again?
No. Mark sold the team a couple of years ago, and there's all kinds of rumors to it. And I think one of the parts to this, Jake, that I believed that Mark was going to follow the pattern of the Maloof brothers. And I don't know if you remember the Maloof brothers. The Maloof brothers were really well-to-do guys who I believe had owned the Rockets in the 80s or 90s. And they got out of it, and they, within 6 months, immediately regretted it. They're like, oh, my God, why did we have so much fun? So they went out and bought the Sacramento Kings. Yep. And I don't know if they still own it or not. But I really thought maybe Mark had some seller's remorse and wanted to get back into it. No, in fact, his shares of the team are going to go down as the Dumont family, Patrick Dumont, who's part of the big casino family, they want to own the Mavericks, and they're not going anywhere, and they're going to be a staple here. And then I expect Patrick Dumont to own the Mavericks for a long time, and Mark Cuban will be a very active fan with access to ownership and maybe some decisions, but nothing more.
By the way, those guys that ended up buying the Kings, my understanding, I tried to talk to them once. Not the easiest thing to do. You know why, Mac?
No.
Little Maloof. Okay. See, that's a thank you. Eddie, thank you for the.
That is so bad.
That surprises you.
And the thing is, I know you long enough. I know how proud of yourself you are of that stupid joke. Like, you've done all these cool things in your career. You've got awards and trophies, great, all this different stuff, great family. You're like, stupid lines like that. You're looking for somebody to high five.
I have no awards and trophies, just so you know. I mean, that is, I have no awards and trophies. I didn't even have a Renault Alliance. You know what I mean? Okay, then last thing about the Mavs, because it does relate to the Pacers. This is fascinating, Mac, because Indiana, and I talked about this earlier, the Pacers trying to stay now within getting one of those 4 picks, and we'll see whether or not that comes to fruition. But Dallas, if you're looking at teams that are, and Peterson from Kansas, your alma mater, is one of the players in play here. There are 4 of them, and the Pacers have to be in that 4, or else they lose that pick if it's 5-9 because of the trade they just made. Is Dallas a team that will throw its Maverick hat in the ring here of trying to basically tank, or is that impossible when you have, in particular, Cooper Flagg and the way he's playing?
I think they already did it. The number of teams, Jake. Well, let me backtrack. Do you believe And I don't want to put you in a compromising position because I know you've got some ties to the Pacers. Do you think the Pacers are tanking?
Yeah, to an extent, yes. I mean, and that's what I was talking about earlier. It's difficult to authentically ask. It's difficult to ask people to be something other than what they authentically are. And they have a roster of players that are authentically competitive and not bad players. You know, Jarris Walker is turning into a pretty good player. And so the way that the Pacers are designed, it's hard to find 7 guys to go out there that you say to yourself, if we play these 7, we ain't going to win, because they've got decent players. I don't think that they're at the point yet, Mac, of saying we're shutting it totally down and Neesmith, Nembhard, McConnell, and everybody are not playing the rest of the year. But I think they are using combinations that keep it in play of the game within competitive balance and then kind of seeing where things fall. I talked to one person over there that told me that at this point they, quote, need a little luck. And I think what that means is seeing which way the ball bounces. So are they all in on guys go out there and lose? I don't think that's the case, but I think that they are now taking liberty with their rotations and being overly cautious with players that might have like the slightest hangnail.
I think what Utah did the other night was horrendous for the NBA. And I think as much fun and as conversation as the lottery created for as long as it did, and it created a real point of interest for fans during a dead period on the schedule, right? Whether the lottery was held in April or May or whatever, and you got the draft, and you had points on a calendar, which is what you're trying to do if you're a league, to get people to talk about it and remain interested in your product when the games aren't being played. Well, that's gone in a direction that I don't think anybody foresaw back in the mid-'80s, and that is the off seasons have become almost more compelling than the regular seasons because of all this crazy player movement. Well, now we're getting to a point now during the regular seasons where you're watching games, you're like, what is going on out there? And whether or not you're questioning guys are taking a dive on certain plays to avoid prop bet numbers or to hit prop bet numbers, or now teams, not coaches, but teams strategically putting lineups out there that no matter how hard they try are not going to win that game.
Right.
And I think, at least in the case of Indiana's case, from the moment Ty Halliburton suffered his injury in Game 7 to Miles Turner's exit to Milwaukee, I think if you looked at the Pacers from that time to the start of the regular season, nobody is thinking, well, they're tanking. They just haven't been any good. And now, granted, what we're seeing is historic, right? A team that went from, one half away from winning an NBA Finals to now very much in the discussion for a lottery pick. That's incredible. And I think if you look at some of these other teams that are just so bad, Sacramento, New Orleans, Washington,
yeah.
No one really questions whether or not they're tanking. They just stink. But I think if the Mavericks have 19 wins and they've lost 8 in a row, they've traded Anthony Davis. They got really nothing in return for him this season that's going to do that much, with all due respect to Marvin Bagley and Chris Middleton. They're not going to play Kyrie Irving. Cooper Flagg is terrific. God, is he good. I don't know how. I mean, they would have to – it almost feels like, Jake, they would have to lose out to get one of those guys, whether it's the Boozer kid, the Darren Peterson kid, the kid at BYU, the 4 or 5 special guys out there. You're like, ooh, boy, that's a guy I want. I don't see how Dallas can get there. Now,
yeah, I mean,
teams are losing. I don't know. You wouldn't rule out anything. But as much as I love basketball, the fact that we're looking at 7 or 8 or 9, 10 teams that are just, I mean, it's embarrassing for basketball. It's embarrassing for the NBA. But I don't look at anything the Pacers have done, and I think what they're doing is out of character today than compared to the first week of the regular season when they stunk because they didn't have enough good players.
Right. Well, and again, I mean, this all goes back to the Halliburton injury, but then on top of that, I mean, Toppin being out, you lose Turner, you lost, legitimately had Neesmith that was out for games and Nembhard. Then at that point, you get so far behind the 8 ball where you're like, well, you know what? I mean, if the basketball gods had us here, then, maybe we got to do some things to stick around in the room for a while, but we'll see where it all pans out.
Jay, can I ask you one quick Pacer question? Do you have a Pacer?
What's that?
Can I ask you one quick Pacer question?
Well, sure.
Okay. So I saw Benedict Mathurin play in college.
Yep.
I thought he was terrific. I was really excited when the Pacers drafted him. I remember you tweeting in like the first couple of months, he had made some plays where you thought, that guy's him. That guy knows he's him, and he's got the game. I was ecstatic when he went off in Game 3 in the NBA Finals. I was like, ooh, if that guy does that, they can win this. Has this season, the way it's gone, and the fact that he's gotten so many starts, is he going to be that guy for the Pacers, or does the head coach hate
they
him
traded him.
and he's doomed? Pardon?
No, they traded him. He was part of the
Oh,
trade
my
for
God,
Zubats.
they traded him?
Yeah, so
oh, my God, I feel like an idiot. I'm sorry. Cut this part out. Seriously.
Hey, Mac, I don't know if you know this or not. You're ready for. Are you sitting down by chance?
Yes.
Sam Darnold won the Super Bowl with the Seahawks.
No, what did they get for him? I'm so embarrassed. I am literally humiliated.
So
what did they get for him?
Well, you don't cover the Pacers. I get it. They traded Benedict Mathurin and Isaiah Jackson to the Clippers for Ivica Zubats as the center position.
Oh, he was the Zubats trade.
Correct.
Guy.
And in doing that, they also traded provisionally their first-round pick this year unless they are in slots 1 through 4. If they go 5 through 9, that pick goes to the Clippers.
That's crazy to me because
Mathurin, to answer your question, and the analogy that I've used repeatedly on this program, Mac, is that Ben Mathurin, the more and more that we saw it, Ben Mathurin is rum. This is what I keep saying on the air, and you can use this in your column if you'd like. Ben Mathurin is rum. I like rum. I enjoy rum. Rum is good on its own, and there are several drinks I enjoy that have rum in it. But the Pacers' offense became an old-fashioned, and an old-fashioned is a fabulous drink, but it doesn't need rum, and it doesn't require rum. And so
that's crazy to me because when I saw they traded for Zubats, it never crossed my mind that they would give up on Mathurin.
Yeah,
like
and
this.
I think
the only thing I can think of, and I have no way of knowing this. You know, I covered Rick Carlisle for a long time. I like Rick a lot. Is that Rick hated him? Am I wrong?
I don't know that was the case. I think it was just the fact that he's an isolation player and they play more of a float offense. I think Carlisle actually, I don't know that I would say he liked or disliked him. I don't know that. It would be unfair of me to say that. But I just think that he, Game 3, he won them Game 3. He also might have been the one that cost them Game 4 in the finals. And that's the yin and yang of the Mathurin journey. But I think the Clippers were in a situation where they wanted to clear cap space. They took on the contract of Mathurin because it expires at the end of the year, and then Jackson as well as the salary match to get out from underneath, even though Zubats' salary is very friendly, but they're going to line up like everybody else and the Giannis sweepstakes probably. But and then actually, Mac, and this will be fun. You can look forward to this. If the Clippers actually sign Giannis sometime around June, then about November you can come on with us and ask how Giannis fits in with the Bucks.
Hey, something else. Did I hear the Pacers traded Ron Anderson and Chuck Person?
Yeah.
Is that right?
They got Michael Williams from Minnesota, the point guard of the future.
I'm telling you, he was good in that series against Boston. Remember that? Yeah. They almost beat Larry Bird.
Stood on the parquet. You can't stop me on the parquet floor. Yeah, that's right. Up
so
next, we'll get you up to speed on the trade that sent Wayman Tisdale to Sacramento next time we talk, Mac. Appreciate the time as always.
Thanks, Jake.
All right. Mac Engel joining us from again, Central Time Zone or 3 weeks ago, whichever way you'd like to look at it on Where Mac Lies. Back into what Danny Hurley had to say last night. We'll do it next. Hey there, Jake Query for Surfside. Look for the can with the sunset stripes. Blueberry lemonade. How's that sound with a little splash of vodka in it? Or you could always do the half and halves. Jake, what are you talking about? Well, let me tell you what I'm talking about. Surfside is iced tea and a splash of vodka, or lemonade and a splash of vodka. Or you could always do the half and half, meaning a half lemonade, half tea combo. Mango tea is one of those that you could do with that, which is awesome. Then, of course, you've heard me talk about the raspberry tea straight up, whatever it might be. Surfside is just 100 calories with no carbonation, so oh so smooth, no bubbles, easy to drink, and just 2 grams of sugar. Look for it wherever you buy your favorite adult beverages. Please be 21, and please consume Surfside responsibly.
Hurley and Company on 93.5 and 107.5 The Fan.
By the way, John Bon Jovi once owned an indoor football team. I suspect he doesn't anymore, because are there any more? I know that like the Fisher's Freight play, but of the Arena League teams, does that league still exist?
I have no idea.
You know what? It must, though, because the Indiana Firebirds were originally the Albany Firebirds, and Byron and I were on our road trip. Was it last year? And we were going through upstate New York, and we were near Albany, and that might have been 2 years ago. At any rate, we were near Albany, and we stopped at a gas station like in the middle of the day, and there was a guy in there wearing a Firebirds jersey. And I'm like, man, that's got to be retro, because they moved to Indiana. And he said, no. There's a new installment of it, and they're playing in the semifinals tonight. I'm on my way to the game. Okay. I have no idea the semifinals of like what league that was, or if it's still the same Arena Football League. I always thought the Firebirds were pretty entertaining. And I think they had a pretty decent fan following here when they played at the Field House. And, Eddie Brown, of course, Antonio Brown's dad, was their star player. And they had, they had some pretty good play. Raymond Filyaw was their quarterback for a while, was really good. They had the kid, they had a quarterback that had been in trouble at Florida State that ended up there, and he was pretty good. Who was the quarterback they had that had been with the Chargers? Somebody help me out with that. But they were only here a handful of years, but pretty entertaining. All right, I want to get back into what Danny Hurley had to say last night. Eddie, do you happen to have, after Danny Hurley, and if you're just joining the program.
Where have you been?
Thank you. Danny Hurley on the post-game television comments on TNT talked about Thad Matta and essentially said, look, this guy is a great coach. I've coached against him at Ohio State and here, and he just doesn't have – and what I thought was interesting from Danny Hurley is when he said he's a great coach back when college basketball was college basketball. But now I just don't know that he has the resources at Butler that are necessary for a coach of that level. And I don't think that he's meaning practice facilities and player dorms and apartments and all that kind of thing. He is meaning flat out money. At least that's what I assumed as I watched it live. Then I heard what he had to say after the game in the press conference, which was this.
I have an idea of what they've spent. I have an idea what they spent, and he should get Big East Coach of the Year for what he's done, what he did with that team in a non-conference before he lost the starting point guard, and then before he's lost his backup point guard. That guy, I coached against Coach when he was at Ohio State. I obviously followed him when he was at Butler. When I was at Rhodey, he went, he beat my ass, I think in year one or year two there, one of his great Ohio State teams. I mean, when it was college basketball, recruiting, developing, culture, building a program, player development, before this turned into the G League, he was, one of the best coaches. So if you give him money and, you give him $8-9 million a year or more to actually, build a team that can compete for championships, he'll do it as good as any of the coaches in the Big East. He's as good as any coach in our league.
Fascinating to me. He said what we all know. $8 to $9 million a year. $8 to $9 million a year. But what Danny Hurley just said, not just speaking the quiet part out loud, taking the quiet part and standing on the top of the Salesforce Tower with a bullhorn. What he just said leads to another fascinating point about college athletics that requires a little bit to ingest and process. which we'll do on the other side. And then Mike Nizilik joins us 2 o'clock talking about what Indiana players are coming to the Combine. We'll get into that with him coming up in about 18 minutes.
This is Query and Company on 93.5 and 107.5 The Fan.
Eddie going with the Bon Jovi theme today. Not even sure how that came about, but I'm cool with it. I don't dislike them. Was just never. They got a ton of hits, though. No doubt about it. By the way, Craig Wheelahan was the quarterback for the Firebirds that had played with the Chargers. And I always want to say, Adrian McPherson was the quarterback that had problems at Florida State and then ended up with the Firebirds as well. We were talking about that earlier. Danny Hurley's comments last night about Thad Matta. Eddie, if you could play for me one more time what it was that he said in the post-game press conference that we just played. Because a couple of things I wanted to that really jumped out at me here. This is Danny Hurley last night after UConn's win at Hinkle Fieldhouse over Butler.
I have an idea of what they've spent. I have an idea what they spent, and he should get Big East Coach of the Year for what he's done, what he did with that team in a non-conference before he lost the starting point guard, and then before he's lost his backup point guard. That guy, I coached against Coach when he was at Ohio State. I obviously followed him when he was at Butler. When I was at Rhodey, he went, he beat my ass, I think in year one or year two there, one of his great Ohio State teams. I mean, when it was college basketball, recruiting, developing, culture, building a program, player development, before this turned into the G League, he was one of the best coaches. So if you give him money and, you give him $8-9 million a year or more to actually, build a team that can compete for championships, he'll do it as good as any of the coaches in the Big East. He's as good as any coach in our league.
Here's the problem with that. A couple of things that are interesting. Danny Hurley, who turned down a mega contract to coach in the NBA with the LA Lakers, turned down millions of coaching in the NBA to coach at UConn, saying that back when it was still college basketball, before it became the G League, remember, I've been predicting forever the G League eventually is going to become Kansas, Indiana, North Carolina, Duke, Louisville, Memphis, UCLA. I know that sounds extreme, but here you have a coach saying out loud, this is basically the G League. And if you want to compete at Butler in the Big East, $8 to $9 million a year. He just threw it out there. Give him $8 to $9 million a year. And if he's saying that while praising the coaching prowess of Thad Matta, what he is saying is he's probably throwing you the number that's the entry level. In other words, you give a Thad Matta $8 or $9 million, that guy can compete. But most coaches would have to have 12 to 14. But that's how good Matta is. That's almost what he's saying. $8 to $9 million. Now, Butler is really in a difficult spot here. So too would be Georgetown. So too would be St. John's. Because they don't have football. I mean, they do. I mean, no disrespect to Butler's football program, but it's not Division I, splitting money in a big conference, revenue-generating football. Butler, basketball is the breadwinner on the Butler campus. And yes, the university itself, when they went to back-to-back national championship games, that was a huge coup for them because, for example, not only did it parlay for them to go into the Atlantic 10 and then into the Big East, but also their application for enrollment numbers all just through the roof. That's the benefit you get. Indiana University is seeing that right now. The number of applicants they're getting for admission as a student and how that can then increase the overall competitiveness and academic standard that you can require to get into school there. But the bigger question for me is, aside from, we've seen coaches, Jay Wright, who I love, don't know him at all, love him as a coach. And I've told the story before, during the COVID NCAA tournament, when they had the entire tournament here, and you could go, they allowed like 400 fans to go watch the games at Gainbridge Fieldhouse, and you had to sit all on one side of the arena. And my buddy Ryan Robertson called me up and said, "You want to go? I've got tickets for Villanova and North Texas," after North Texas had upset Purdue. So we went to the game. Villanova, Jay Wright's coaching. There were so few people in the arena, you could hear Jay Wright coaching. You could hear him instructing and teaching. And at one point in the game, it became apparent that, Villanova was up 25 or 30 or whatever. It was the second round of the tournament, so Nova's on their way to the Sweet 16. And Villanova had like probably 150 fans there that had come out here for it. And late in the game, I've told the story before, North Texas, it was obvious that North Texas was going to make a substitution and bring out their seniors at the end of the game. And the Villanova fans that were sitting behind the Villanova bench all got up and moved. I thought, what in the world is happening? They all moved to sit behind the North Texas bench so that they could applaud, and that those players for North Texas had people applauding them as they came off the floor for their final game. And later, I asked someone at the JW, just one of the workers there, where all the teams stayed for the first and second round, hey, what team did you most enjoy? And they were like, the kids from Villanova were thankful. They cleaned up after themselves. They pushed their chairs in. My point being all of that to say that it was very obvious to me that Jay Wright was a guy who had principle and has principle about him. And you could see it within his program in all areas. And yet Jay Wright, with the love of the game of basketball and the purity of it and the teaching of it, decided to walk away. And Tony Bennett at Virginia decided to walk away. And we wondered why these coaches were retiring. And here's Danny Hurley that turned down millions in the NBA, and he sounds right there like a guy that is basically saying, this crap's gone too far. But in addition to that, when he says you need $8 to $9 million a year for Thad Matta, where does Butler get that? Where does any program get that annually? Does Butler have an alumni base that can come up with $8 or $9 million? Sure. But annually? Because how many times can you go to the same booster? I don't care how big a fan they are. Indiana fans are soaking in every single moment of what just happened with their college football program, and they love it, and they should. But you just heard Mac Ingles say that the word at TCU is that Josh Hoover, roughly $5 million to get him to Bloomington. I don't know that that's a factual number, but probably within the realm of possibility. And Indiana's going to get a lot of windfall from, of course, the playoff run and the television money, and being in the Big Ten in general is going to bring you in TV money alone like some $75 million a year. Spend as you may. But when you are going into and looking for boosters to help supplement the money that you're needing to spend, how many times can you go to that well? How many times can you go to the same car dealer and say, last year I know that you gave us $150,000 because we had a swing forward that was going to be a great player for us, and he was a good player, but he got hurt and then he transferred. So this year we've got one that's even better. We need $225,000. How many times can you go to that well before people are like, look, I gotta sit this one out? $8 to $9 million a year? A year. That's why I've always said maybe Butler would have been better staying in the A-10, because there it's probably, gasp, dare I say it, $4 to $6 million a year. Big time business, man. And when Danny Hurley is saying, and he's saying things like G League crap the way it used to be, and he sounds like a guy that's longing for it, and this is as fast-paced, keep up with it, all over the place, East Coast guy as it gets. And even he needs to stop and take a deep breath. That tells you something. Indiana's got 9 players headed to the NFL Combine. Who was left out and who needs a really good combine to cement their chance to get drafted? Not named Mendoza. We'll go down to Bloomington. We'll talk to our buddy Mike
Nizilik.
Thank you, Eddie, who joins us from the Bloomington Herald-Times next. Hey there, Jake Query for Surfside. Look for the can with the sunset stripes. Surfside, I'm talking about iced tea and vodka, lemonade in vodka, all in the same can. You know, you could do both. You could do just simply lemonade with a splash of vodka. You could do iced tea with a splash of vodka, or you could put them both together with the wide variety of flavors from Surfside. Oh, so smooth because no carbonation, so easy to drink, and just 100 calories, 2 grams of sugar. Look for it wherever you buy your favorite adult beverages. Surfside, please be 21 and consume responsibly.
Query and Company on 93.5 and 107.5 The Fan.
Did you play this one already?
I have not.
Are you sure?
I'm sure.
I think you did.
No.
Am I reaching the point now where all of a sudden everything's, I'm getting, it's like when people will say, what'd you talk about in the show yesterday? I'm like, I don't remember if that was yesterday or a month ago.
No, I have not played this yet.
Okay. I mean, I'm not like Mac Engel, who didn't know that Ben Matherin had been traded, but so which ones have you done so far?
Living on a Prayer.
Yep.
We played that one. It's My Life.
Yeah.
Runaway. Bad Medicine. I can't remember the other one that I played.
It's My Life twice, right?
No, I haven't played
You
It's
sure?
My Life twice. Yes,
Positive?
I'm sure. 100%.
I think you have.
No.
Yes. We could ask the audience, but we know this much. Very few stick around for more than one segment on this program, right?
Yeah, that's true.
Joining us now on the Java House Peel and Pour guest line, we've talked about the NFL Combine. When is the Combine? It's usually in April, is it not?
Combine itself is in a couple of weeks.
That's right, because the draft
is in April. Yes.
But Indiana, we now know 9 players, 9 times, will be represented. Those players, Fernando Mendoza, who probably will be the number 1 player selected in the draft. Roman Hemby, the running back, who runs really hard. Omar Cooper Jr., Elijah Surratt, who catches everything thrown his way. Riley Nowakowski, their tight end. Pat Coogan, who was honored after the Rose Bowl. Aiden Fisher, who was Johnny on the spot all the time. D'Angelo Pons, Lou Moore, those that have been selected for the Combine. Joining us now from Bloomington, Mike Nizilik of the Bloomington Herald-Times. Mike, I'll begin with this. Were there any that were not invited to the Combine that surprised you or felt like a slight?
Well, I mean, I think you could make the case for 3 of the other guys. Kalen Black, the running back that was kind of co-starter with Hemby. Mikel Kamara, defensive end, who obviously sack numbers were down, but led the FBS and quarterback pressures a year ago. I mean, somebody like that usually gets an invite. And then Devin Boykin, obviously, their safety, kind of one of their safeties alongside Lou Moore. But at the same time, obviously, 319 or 16 players invited total. I mean, you can't have everybody. One of the things that Indiana will benefit from is that, scouts saw a lot of their games, right? Obviously, because they played in big moments against big competition. So those guys will have had eyes on them, and they'll benefit from the pro day with the fact that, in past years, the Indiana pro day hasn't been necessarily something to write home about. This year, all eyes will be in Bloomington because Fernando Mendoza will obviously be there and plans to throw. So they'll benefit from that as well.
And Mendoza has announced for the actual combine that he will not throw there. He will do it on his pro day. But that is not unusual for a presumptive first rounder, in this case, number 1 pick, correct?
Right. There's real no benefit. I mean, what does he have to prove at this point? I mean, he was the Heisman Trophy winner. They took him 16-0 all the way to the national title game. He's got the tape, right? He has nothing to prove. Didn't play in any of the Senior Bowls or Shrine Bowls. Obviously with the quick turnaround, there was just nothing. There's no mountain he has to climb. I mean, it's all on tape. It's all on film. Obviously the interviews help, and getting in front of people at those spots, and that's what he'll do at the combine. But and he's talked about his pro days more throwing for everybody else as opposed for himself. Like he does not have anything to prove, but he wants to help the guys that helped him get here.
Mike Niziolek is my guest. He's on the Java House Peel and Pour guest line. Mike, of those that I just listed off that were invited to the combine, we'll go with a couple of questions here. I'll begin with this one. Which player do you think most benefited from this season of Indiana football and Curt Cignetti's development? One that perhaps when their college career began, you did not think this was even a possibility, and yet here they are because they blossomed under what Indiana was able to allow them to showcase in terms of their individual skill set.
Well, I certainly think D'Angelo Pons fits. It's obviously not the offensive guy, or maybe Curtis Cignetti didn't have the hand in this sort of necessarily his development on the defensive side of the ball. But I mean, their philosophy in terms of making sure everybody's ready and sort of steady development. He's called him like the most talented player he's coached, in an entire career, right? Year 1 to whatever 3 it was, but it's All-American each year, freshman All-American at JMU, then obviously All-American last 2 years in Bloomington. The size concerns sort of now have kind of gone away with him just because of what he's shown on film. And somebody like that getting, being an early mid-round pick would be, really against the odds, and just in terms of like that size, it does kind of scare a lot of teams off. But I think he's proven and he's shown, he's a heck of a player, heck of a competitor, and I think he's probably the number 1 on that list, because I think he might be the second one to go after Mendoza.
What player that you look at, Mike, or that when you talk about it, or you talk to people from outside of Indiana, Pons and Mendoza, it goes without saying, because there was a lot of interest about Pons going into the year, obviously, and one of the transfers. But which one feels like their stock is improving the most rapidly here, if that makes sense?
I don't know. I mean, the problem is that Indiana has a lot of guys, maybe with the exception of like on Omar Cooper, that are in sort of combine-esque sort of like, they're going to run a 4.3 and blow everybody out of the water. And like, that's how they kind of just like jump up the boards. I think a lot of these guys are more guys that when they get in the interview rooms are going to sort of be like, that's the guy we want in our locker room culture. Like, that's the guy we want, if you can't necessarily make an impact, like not a lot of these guys are like day one impact guys, right? Like an Aiden Fisher or a Pat Coogan, but like they will make you better. They will find ways to get on the field and make an impact, right? Like those guys could be special teams guys. Those guys could be, key backups. And so I think in the NFL, like they're not the prototypical, like going to jump off a draft board because, like I said, their shuttle run was so great or this or that at the combine, but they are guys that I think are going to get in a room, impress scouts, impress executives, and find a way to get drafted maybe in the late rounds and stick around and have a solid NFL career just because of their makeup.
Mike, what I'm about to say is irrelevant because it's going to be the case regardless, but just out of curiosity, Mendoza as the presumptive number 1 pick in the draft, do you believe that's because he has had a season and has a skill set that is immediately translatable as the number 1 pick regardless of year? Or is he also benefiting from the fact that this is a year that does not have a high number of quote-unquote franchise quarterbacks?
Well, I certainly think both. Like, I mean, there was talk about more, even with the year he had, being like a potential number one pick just because of the skill set he had, and obviously offering sort of like a counterpoint to maybe what Mendoza brings. Like, there is none of that. So, like there's not even a discussion. Like, in another year, like maybe there's 2-3 guys that are involved, and like maybe Mendoza has to go to the combine and throw or something like that. But I mean, it is just he's such a clear presumptive head and shoulders above the rest of the field that like that maybe is a little bit more unique than most years. And I think like I said, but I mean, I don't know that many guys that would have changed the conversation. Like I said, Dante Moore maybe, but even then, I still think Mendoza would have been the number one pick on like 80% of the draft board. So it didn't change a whole lot, but obviously, changed the discussion a little bit in terms of like, look, he's the number one pick no matter what. There's no way anybody can envision him not being it.
And by the way, to clarify for folks that are unfamiliar, which to some extent includes me, the NFL has to invite you to the combine, correct? This is not the university saying, here's who we're sending. The NFL says these are the guys that we want to take a look at, right?
Correct. Yeah, it's all invite based, and the pro day is open to usually open to all the graduating people out of eligibility that Indiana just hosts on their own. But yeah, the combine is invite only.
Mike, while I've got you here, Mike Neislick, my guest, Java House Peel and Port guest line. I want to talk a little basketball as well, because obviously you know that as well from the Indiana basketball side of things, and we've talked to you about that in the past. I've been talking a lot today about Danny Hurley's comments last night, Mike, and if you're not familiar with what Danny Hurley had to say, after last night's Butler, Connecticut game, Danny Hurley was asked about that. Actually, I don't even know if he was asked about Thad Matta. He essentially volunteered about Thad Matta, his support for Matta, and the terms that he used, Mike, he said, this is a guy that showed what a great coach he was when it was still college basketball. And then later he went on to say, before it became the G League. And later he went on to say, just give Thad $8 to $9 million a year, and then you'll see what kind of coach he is. And this is a guy, as I talked about with Danny Hurley, that turned down multi-millions of dollars from the Lakers to coach in the NBA. But he almost sounded like he himself was exhausted by where things are with NIL. Do you believe that we are getting to a point, Mike, where there's going to have to be some sort of jurisdiction or cap put on all of this to, at the very least, present as though there is some sort of boundary to the wild, wild west we've entered into?
Well, I mean, that was what the College Sports Commission was supposed to be, and revenue share, and then NIL was supposed to be kind of like that little extra in the pot. But like teams have tried every which way to sort of circumvent it. So like, I mean, they're the makers of their own demise in the sense that like when the rules sort of leave a window open, they will try to get through it, right? Like it's just. It's hard to find sympathy for the coaches when like they're the ones. Not necessarily Hurley specifically, but just like they're the ones doing it, right? They're the ones pushing to get more money to be able to offer these deals. So it's like it's just I don't know what the solution is. Like it's not working right now, and I mean you see all the eligibility stuff, which is all sort of tied to all this, and like it's a mess, and there's no easy solutions because teams are always going to want the competitive edge and to take advantage of any sort of like opportunity they have. On the flip side, that means that like you need to have real like enforcement and rules, which the NCAA does not really have the teeth to be able to do. So like, I don't know where you go next.
What would you guess Indiana or any Big Ten school for that matter, Mike, any upper league Big Ten school, what would you guess their NIL expenditure is? Not just in player money, but just overall budget. The overall basketball budget, let's just say at Indiana, roughly speaking, is what?
I don't have off the top of my head. I mean, those and the financial numbers for next year are coming out probably in the next couple of weeks in terms of like what the actual budgets are. In terms of NIL, like or with the revenue share, basketball gets, like 15-ish% of like the 20 million, around there. And it's like sort of on the higher end. I mean, you're talking about schools trying to get, extra on top of that to be able to, have a competitive roster. It's sort of wild in the sense that like any numbers that get put out there, you kind of take with a grain of salt because they're jockeying for money, right? Like these agents are jockeying for money for their clients, and so it's sort of like it all feels very inflated. Like when you see like, oh, this quarterback got offered $5 million, it's like, well, who's saying, right? Like, I mean, I don't know. It's hard to say, like, but I mean, in terms of revenue share, obviously for this year was $20 million. It goes up a little bit next year, but in terms of like what basketball teams are getting, it's somewhere in the ballpark of like the next big chunk of it besides football, like 15% ish. And so you can kind of go from there, and then teams are supplementing that with NIL and trying to obviously get as much as they can. But those funds are all coming from someplace else too. So a lot of places are we're really hoping revenue share would sort of take away that pressure so they can get back to fundraising for stadium projects and other things. But now it's kind of the status quo is sort of continued here with teams trying to have to still supplement that stuff with NIL funds.
Darren DeVries' group has won 2 in a row. They've won 5 of their last 6. Big one upcoming this weekend at Illinois. How is Indiana different than they were 2 months ago?
It's a good question. Darren DeVries says not much. He says basically they were playing games the way they are now, but they just weren't finishing, or there were longer stretches where it was like they would go cold from the field. Like there were these 10-minute stretches in games where they were just having problems and kind of got away from obviously they're the sort of the moving the ball around or shooting well. And so they're doing the same things. It's not like a radically different team. I think Lamar Wilkerson obviously stepped up a little bit, but I mean, if you look at his numbers going back to the non-conference, they're not that much different. Like he dominated Penn State, and that was in December. So I don't think it's any individual one thing. I just think it's the growth of a team that obviously didn't have any returning players. And so you see them putting everything, together more so, and for that full 40 minutes as opposed to having those longer lapses that have cost them and sort of the losses they had. But it's not a radically different team than it was necessarily a month ago or even 2 months ago.
The NFL Scouting Combine, back to that, begins 1 week from Monday, as a matter of fact, February 23rd until March 2nd at Lucas Oil Stadium here in town. Indiana will be well represented, but again, Fernando Mendoza throwing at his pro day down in Bloomington. Mike, I'm sure, will be on top of all of it. Mike Nizilik from the Bloomington Herald-Times. Mike, appreciate the time as always, man.
Anytime. Thanks, man.
All right, Mike Nizilik joining us on the Java House Peel and Pour guest line. And I'm telling you, not to belabor the point, but those statements from Danny Hurley to me were very eye-opening. Something else that took place last night that a little bit eye-opening to get back into this. Last night, I went to the Ball State-Buffalo game. I like Michael Lewis a great deal. I don't know that I truly got a feel for or grasped. I mean, because I was going to the Ball State game, maybe I should have done this beforehand, so I apologize. But really just looked further into their season and the way things have gone and their roster. And, that's a great arena. I mean, Worthen Arena really is. And that opened, I believe, when I was in college or shortly before that. And I remember, going to it and just walking around it. I mean, it really is not a bad seat in the house. Looks cool from the outside, all of it. And it's from the north side of Indy, an hour flat, basically, to get there. And yet, it was diehards and parents. I mean, that's basically it. And I'm not saying that that's not probably always the case unless all of a sudden you have some Indiana State level 23-1 under Josh Schertz season at that level of play in terms of the crowd. But made me wonder what their future is going to be, or how, Michael Lewis, what his future is going to be. Buffalo won that game last night. Then came home. I saw the end of the Butler, Connecticut game. That's where I saw Danny Hurley's comments, and then saw, furthermore, the comments that he made in the press conference afterwards. And I also turned on the Pacer game at the end of the game. And I'm going to go back to and repeat what I said off the top of the show. And that is that, and I can do it in a more abbreviated version, but there have been times, one of the advantages, I guess, to just having experience and being around something long enough is that no matter what it is, no matter what walk of life you're talking about, the more that you go through something, the more organic you can be. And the longer that you do something, the more inevitably your organic nature comes out and your true colors show. And I made mention to the fact that earlier in my career, when I was, probably overzealous for opportunity or advantage within the industry, whatever it might be, I was told who I was going to be. Hey, we're going to give you an opportunity here, Jake, but we're going to ask that you be this way. And the first job that I had in radio, truthfully, I was told to just push the envelope, be edgy. Be edgy. We're going to be young. We're going to be hip. Be all those things. Ruffle feathers. Get the phone lines lit up. And matter of fact, I even remember them taking me out to lunch and telling me, don't hold back. And that was all well and good, and that helped in the immediacy. But in reality, it was a difficult time for me because that wasn't authentically who I was. And I somewhat pity people that authentically who they are is to be ruffle feathers. I just, that's not who I want to be. And I thought about all of that last night as I was watching the Pacer game, because as I was watching the Pacer game and I'm looking at it and it's a tie game and somebody hits a big three and the Pacers go up 3. And I had this dichotomy within me because the natural instinct or reaction for me when somebody hits a three is like, yes. And then I'm like, no. It reminded me of kind of and I remember back when I worked at Channel 6 and when we first started seeing budget cuts come in media coverage and the NCAA tournament had arrived. And of course, it had always been a habit it was one of my favorite times a year to sit down as a sports department and figure out, okay, who's covering this game? Who's traveling here? Who's traveling there? Who's going with Ball State? Who's going with Butler? Who's going with Indiana? Who's going with Purdue? Do we need to send somebody to cover Evansville? Whatever it might be. Notre Dame. And there was a year at Channel 6, one of the very first years when they started cutting budget. And so one of the local teams we couldn't cover. I'm not going to say which one, but we did not travel to cover that team in the NCAA tournament. And we're all sitting in the sports office, and a player for said team hits a shot late to presumably win for them the opening round game of the tournament. And instinctively and naturally, we all jumped up. Holy cow, what a shot. And Ed Sorensen then catches himself and says, guys, calm down. We need these guys to go down in flames. Because he was worried that the further they went, the more it was going to illustrate to the viewers that we were not there covering them live. So we needed it kind of out of the way quickly. And last night, that's kind of what watching the Pacer game was like. Ethan Thompson hits a big 3, and I'm like, yes, cool, whatever. And then I'm like, whoa, wait a minute. Like, I'm hearing Ed Sorensen in my voice. Like, we need these guys to lose this game. And as I'm watching it, and they're taking on Brooklyn, and about and you're aware of and you're keenly watching and keeping an eye on the standings of making sure that you stay in that bottom 4 in terms of technically bottom 6 to give yourself the best chance to get and hold on to your draft pick as one of the top 4 picks in the draft. And so I'm saying to myself, why are these guys winning this game? Why is Jarris Walker going off for 29? And that's when it dawned on me. You can't forever expect and ask people to be something other than authentically who they are. And you don't make it to the NBA. I don't care how bit a player you look to be in the NBA, how peripherally you look in terms of your skill set in the National Basketball Association. If you are in the NBA, the top series and the top league of basketball in the world, if you're in the NBA, it's because you have been the ultra competitor perfectionist for your entire life of building your basketball career. And even if that means that you cracked the code into being one of the 280th best player in the NBA, in the world, you're in the NBA because you are that. And so if you're playing for a franchise and your minutes and your opportunities are only coming because the star point guard is out, or the star shooting guard is out, or the power forward is resting for a night, or the starting center just got traded and you're figuring out, and the new guy isn't playing yet or whatever else. No matter what reasoning it may be that you're getting opportunity to be on the floor, once you're on the floor, your authentic, organic nature that got you there is to be uber competitive and to expect the best out of yourself and to exhibit the best out of yourself. And it's opportunity for you to showcase to the rest of the league what it is that you can do, so that once the roster you're on, the Pacers, gets back to fully healthy and they're running it back next year and trying to get back to where they were in Oklahoma City. If you know that may squeeze you out, you may be looking at it saying, but there's still chance for me if Minnesota has an opening, or Phoenix has an opening, or Atlanta has an opening, whatever it may be, because your competitive nature and the personal pride that got you to that point is authentically who you are. And so it is unfair for us to expect that those players would compromise that and go out and basically tank. Now, can the Pacers use different combinations that might not be the best interlocking combination so that somebody else has a better chance? Yeah, perhaps. Are we going to see a lot more of, quote, soft tissue injury or rest and things like that? Or, load management? Perhaps. But at its core, players in the NBA are competitors. And last night, and what you see last night is that Indiana, even with their last third of their roster, have pretty competitive guys that want to win games. And they are entitled to that opportunity to do so. But it is tough because the Pacers are well aware of what happens if they lose that top 4 pick. And yes, I do believe. I don't know. I'm not directly quoting, but I do believe if truth serum is put in them, that the Pacers brass is looking at it and saying, yeah, we're kind of hopeful that things fall the way where we can keep that first-round pick and get one of those wings. And that helps us even more so, more than does winning a game in February over the Brooklyn Nets. But if you look at where things are right now, slotted, the Nets, 6th hardest remaining schedule. Advantage Nets in staying in that mix. The Wizards, 11th hardest remaining schedule. The Mavericks, 13th hardest remaining schedule. And then those whose schedule becomes a little easier, unfortunately. The Pacers, Kings, Jazz. It's going to be even that much more of a challenge. But keep an eye on it as we move forward. There was big news on the West Side today in terms of sports epicentered out of Indianapolis. I'll tell you about that next.
is Query and Company on 93.5 and 107.5 The Fan.
Pretty big news that came out from the Speedway today. And I realize that when you see it on paper, it probably doesn't jump out as overly meaningful, especially to those of you that are not entrenched within the day-to-days, if you will, from IndyCar.
Hold on, Jake.
Yes, sir.
Prepare to qualify.
There we go. And that's coming before we know it, right? End of the year here in St. Pete. But I remember the Brady Bunch. When I was a kid, I thought the Brady Bunch actually took place in Indianapolis. I was super stoked about it. And what's funny about the Brady Bunch, or any show for that matter, is that when I was watching it, probably the first time that my sisters and I would have been watching the Brady Bunch, it would have been probably 1977, 78, 79, that era. I had no idea that what I was watching is a show that had been off the air for 7 years at that point. Actually, 5 years at that point, whatever it might be. But what I knew was that I lived in Indiana. I lived in, at the time, Shelbyville, and then Indianapolis. And there was an episode of the Brady Bunch where Greg Brady buys a kind of a lemon car. Interestingly enough, buys it from the same actor who also played Ratfink, Jerry Rogers. But when he soups up the car and he's getting ready to show the rest of the Brady family the work that he did on it and the improvements he made, he says, "Get ready to see the hottest wheels this side of Indianapolis." And I thought that meant that he lived in Indianapolis. I was super excited about it. My dad's like, no, Jake. He's saying that because Indianapolis, because of the 500, is the place that is seen as the epicenter for hot cars. Oh, okay. And that is true because, and the reason the Indianapolis 500-mile race became the iconic event that it became is because, amongst many reasons, but this is my opinion, in the post-war era in this country, we almost had like a second industrial revolution. And the industrial revolution, if you will, that we had in the post-war era was Middle Earth America, Anderson, Indiana, Greensburg, Indiana, Sparta, Kentucky, Hayes, Kansas. These towns all had factories where people built things and made things. And they took great pride in the work that they did for it. And people had a job and a pension and a salary, and sometimes their kids went to college, and other times their kids came to work for at the same factory or wherever it may be. And life was good, right? And for a large percentage of this population in the United States in that time, the automobile was an integral part of the lifestyle. They either worked at a factory or a showroom or any number of things revolving around the automobile. The development of the Chrysler, the development of a General Motors car, the Pontiac, the Oldsmobile, the Chevrolet, the development of Ford, if they weren't, of any of the big three. And if they didn't work in those places, oftentimes they had their own car they worked on in the driveway. Their Dodge Challenger that they were going to make faster than their neighbor's Ford Mustang, whatever it might be. And so the showcase for all of that was the Indianapolis Motor Speedway. And men and women around this country looked forward every May to seeing what was going to be unveiled and what the latest development was. Not unlike people that you talk to that were like, I couldn't wait to run down to the showroom floor and see the new fins on the Pontiac or how the Plymouth looked this year. And my dad would tell me about when he was a kid, how he would sit in his bedroom and he could tell by the sound of the car that passed by what kind of car it was, what make it was. And my dad, to this day, when you ask him the difference between, a 57 Ford and a 59 Chevy, well, the light fixtures and all of that. So all of the innovation that went into the automobile, not only to make it more sleek and sexy in the showroom floor for commercial purposes, but also the innovation that went into the development and the mechanics of the automobile were on the ultimate display every May in Indianapolis, Indiana. And you couldn't wait to see what it was that was done in terms of what did Andy Granatelli come up with this year? How's the Novi going to run? What's it going to sound like? Is Alfa Romeo going to be competitive with Danny Sullivan? Can it unseat? Holy cow, wait till you see what's happening with the Mercedes and what Roger Penske came up with. The Elmore engine this year has a little more horsepower. The Buick is fast as heck, but can it last 500 miles? On and on and on and on and on. And as we have gotten to the point now where the speed element of it, there probably is a limit in terms of the G-force and everything that goes into the speed of the Indianapolis 500 and the safety of it. And I don't just mean the safety for the drivers, but rather for spectators and everything else. If you've reached that threshold from a speed standpoint, and you can never necessarily get past the R.A. Luyendyk fastest lap speed, then what do you need? What you need then is at the very least the competition of engine. If the innovation isn't necessarily as important as prioritized as it once was, at least the competition of it is what you need. Because we in America love competition, and we'd love to see things compete. And yes, there have been years where you had a engine manufacturer, a single one. And it was thought by a lot of people that we might be headed back there again because Chevrolet was obviously involved, but then Honda, there were all kinds of rumors that Honda was going to be done and that Alex Palou has dominated with the Honda engine. And, you know, what will happen now, you've got Honda that was sitting on the pole and winning the Indy 500, winning the points championship. Is Honda then going to use that as their swan song? That's it. Sayonara, see ya, thank you, thanks for the memories. And these things are cyclical. But earlier today, it was announced that starting next season, 2027, Honda, who is still around in an expiring deal right now, and Chevrolet have inked deals with IndyCar to stay as engine manufacturers for that series above and beyond just the next season. So that means that now you will continue to have, and every year it changes a little bit. And I know that some of this is gearhead stuff, but if you're a fan of sports in Indianapolis, you should embrace the fact that the sport itself is still having something that brings attention within that sport to the IndyCar series, which is based here in the Indy 500, and the things like, okay, so Honda might be a little bit faster in the corners, but Chevrolet's got better breakaway speed. What about the fuel efficiency? Honda's a little better in between stops. And these things change year in and year out. But it's that sort of storyline that gives you more to watch and look for when it comes to the Indy 500. And that's why that story and that news coming out earlier today was a big deal.
Jake, you know how we educate and entertain people?
That is correct, yes. And you finally got the order correct. We educate and entertain.
Okay. You know how we're live, local, and late breaking?
Yes, we are indeed.
You know how the last couple of days this whole Darren Peterson situation has been smelly?
In Kansas, with the agent allegedly orchestrating whether or not he's going to play and whether he has the flu and et cetera.
Well, Bill Self has had enough. He has finally spoke out within the last couple hours about the whole situation.
This is a guy that could be, in fact, one of the players that is within the draft that everyone's shooting for, including Indiana, right?
Correct. He specifically, this is a part of a 4-minute answer about the entire situation, but I wanted to isolate just this like 50 seconds as him talking about just the number of injuries that Peterson's been dealing with.
Okay. Was his hamstring legit? Hell yes. Would you risk injuring it more in November? No. Was his cramping legit? Yes, positively it was. Did he turn his ankle bad to the point where he couldn't practice for 9 days and then practice one day and play BYU? Yes. And that was adrenaline kicking in the BYU game. And then, of all things, he gets sick. And this is what blows my mind. Well, he didn't play because he's sick, isn't a big deal. But he didn't play because he was sick when he didn't play the other games, added together becomes a big deal in people's minds. He's got his string of bad luck.
So Bill Self's had enough, not of the situation, but of the questioning of it.
He's had enough of all the people on social media trying to read between the lines and everything like that.
Well, wasn't there a game where his agent went down and said something to the coaches, and then Peterson didn't play in the second half?
That was the BYU game that he was referencing, where he had I think it was quad soreness or cramping or something like that. And so the agent of Darren Peterson was communicating with the head athletic trainer and you say the assistant AD or whatever of Kansas. I can't even remember.
Here's the thing, though. I'm going to nitpick this even further, and tinfoil hat it even more of what Bill Self had to say. Which I'll do on the other side. And J&V will join us. Crossover brought to you by the good guys at Love Heating and Air, love-hvac.com. 317-353-2141. We'll get into that next.
Company on 93.5 and 107.5 The Fan.
So here's my thing with what Bill Self had to say, Eddie. An open disclaimer, I like Bill Self a lot. He was at Illinois when I was in St. Louis and covered Illinois. Frank Williams was their big star player at the time. And Bill Self has this weird skill that he has like a photographic memory when it comes to meeting people. So if he meets you one time and you see him, I don't know how many years later, but he literally, like, you introduce yourself to him once and you never need to again. And he'll, hey, man, how you doing? Like, it's incredible. Really nice dude. Always liked him. And an elite level basketball coach. But when he says those things about Peterson, he almost has to. Because in the world that we live in now, it's all about, and it's always been about the Jimmies and Joes as much as the X's and O's. And if he has a player that is the presumptive number one or certainly top 3 draft pick and was a top flight recruit, he can't come out and basically poo-poo. And I'm not saying that deep down this is how he feels, but even if he felt like he was getting played or they were giving the player too much control, he has to be weary of saying that too outwardly because he wants the perception that this is a place that you want to come if you want to be able to showcase yourself as a top recruit to go into the NBA, and you want to appear friendly, if you will, of that process. Now, the other thing that came out in the last, I guess, over the course of today, the mayor of Hammond is now saying that the Bears are basically saying to themselves, why not Indiana, right? And if the Bears approached Hammond about a new stadium, that then becomes weird to me because isn't Portage supposedly the one that's building like some ultraplex? They're interested in building a domed stadium with all kinds of bells and whistles, and I have no idea where the money's going to come from, but they say at no public tax dollars. So now there's Portage, there's Hammond, there's Iowa, all for the Bears to end up staying in Chicago, which I bet is what happens. J&B has arrived. Crossover brought to you by the good guys at Love Heating and Air. Love-HVAC.com is the website. 317-353-2141 is the telephone number. By the way, John, I have bad news for you.
Bad news for me. That's wonderful.
I am super stoked for you for April 19th. You're going to go see Thomas Dolby potentially.
Blinded me with science.
But I pulled up a video of him.
Yes.
In terms of a live show recently.
He's not doing it acoustically, is he?
It's
you
literally
better be plugging that crap in or I'm not going.
It's him sitting, and he looks super cool, and he sounds cool, but it's just him with like a Casio keyboard synthesizer.
At least it's something's got to be plugged in.
And he like hits a few things. No, I agree. But he hits a few things and he's just kind of like, and then he just kind of talks along to the lyrics of She Blinded Me with Science. And then he hits a button and you keep hearing the guy going, Science. I mean, it's kind of cool, but it like people weren't exactly jumping out of their seats for it. But anyway, what's on the big program
By the
today?
way, a multiplex facility in Portage, what is that, like a Rally's with a dual drive-through?
Honestly, yeah.
Yeah.
You know, there's one of those, and I don't know where it is in the region, but, you know, if you're driving to Chicago, I think it's in Crown Point, there are 2 Speedway gas stations right across the street from each other.
Really?
Literally. Right
well,
across
that's the armpit. That's what they do in the armpit. Can you imagine the Chicago Bears? Let's put our team in the armpit. That's a hell of a plan.
There's no way, right?
There's zero way. None.
Right.
So, unless you want to put it in Rosalon with nudes a popping there.
That'd be cool.
The nudist camp.
Hypatia Lee running around.
Oh, Hypatia Lee.
Ron Jeremy's in prison, isn't he? He couldn't be there, right?
Yeah, I think he's a clown, but I've always been in big time love with the Lynn sisters. Amber, Portia, Ginger.
Yeah.
They weren't really sisters, but
Tara Patrick, did she ever make her way to Rosemont?
Tara Patrick, yeah.
These are all just rumors that we've heard about, John and I.
Were you a big fan of Christy Canyon like I was?
No, she was, Christy Canyon, fine, sure. What about Candy Loving?
Yeah. Oh, yeah, that goes way back. early 70s.
Yeah.
And,
you know?
Yeah, well, so that does that to your ears too whenever Eddie says, get you a time, and does it shut the microphone off or just your ears off? Because James does that, and I want to beat the crap out of him all the time.
Eddie rarely gets in my ear, but yes.
That's good.
It does.
Yeah, I didn't know if it shut the mic off. Sounds like it shuts the mic off. What do you think about Hurley and what he said about Butler?
We've been talking about it all day. I think that's when Danny Hurley is speaking the loud part out loud like that, and that when he sounds fed up with the state of college basketball, and that's a guy that turned down the NBA.
He's going to the NBA after this year. I would damn straight bet you. That's why you feel so comfortable in saying that.
And now we know why, even though we knew it anyway. Yeah. The Jay Wrights, the Tony Bennett's. I mean, these guys are all like, you know what, man.
I don't need to mess with this whatsoever.
That's exactly
correct.
correct.
The other part about it is, too, and I know it's about money, and I know Butler doesn't have it or they need more, but I'm not going to just excuse that easily. It's not like the Big East is a juggernaut here, everybody. I mean, they're losing to some crap water teams.
They are.
I get the whole money thing, but I mean, you could coach them up and maybe they could play a little bit better. Is that okay too?
I agree, but
yeah.
But here's the other thing, John. When he starts saying $8 to $9 million, I mean, come on, man. How many schools can afford to pay $8 to $9 million per year for a roster? It's insane.
Yeah, he's going to the NBA next year. No doubt about that. Hey, by the way, too, with the Pacers, I'll bring this up. Oh, I'm sorry. Oh, yeah. See, you cut it off again. I hate that. Listen, fix that. James does that all the time, and I think it cuts my mic off.
It did cut your mic off, I think, right?
I don't think so. It just cuts it off in my ear.
Okay. John said he has one more thing to say about the Pacers.
I'll say
I guess he'll do it at the top of his program because that's up next. I thank you for listening to Query & Company.